One day in 7th grade, I sat in Mrs. McKennis's 6th period honors not pre-calculus, it was 7th grade, pre-algebra class, chewing on my pen. Now, I'm amazed I even remember it was pre-algebra class after 40 years. I have no idea what Mrs. McKinnis was teaching us that day. The only thing I know for sure that I learned in pre-algebra class was that when trying to solve a story problem, always clearly define which X you're talking about and what it relates to. And I think I remember that because I find that good advice for all story problems, not just the ones in math. So one day, in Mrs. McKinnis's 6th period pre-algebra class, I sat chewing on my pen. And I say one day, but it wasn't just one day that I chewed on my pen, because the truth of the matter is, even as an adult, I love chewing on things. Pens, ice, fingernails if I'm not paying attention. Freud would say that I'm orally fixated. I have used that as a flirtation line in my 20s, and I found that it generally worked, even though I don't know anyone who really thinks chewing on fingernails is particularly sexy. Freud would also say that I need to fix this need to chew on things by doing lots of deep emotional therapy, and I'd say Freud is full of shit. Because the truth of the matter is I have ADHD, which we did not know back when I sat in Mrs. McKinnis's 6th period pre-algebra class. And my brain is often chewing on 65 thoughts at once, and somehow that act of physical chewing calmed down my brain to help me focus and feel more comfortable in my environment. So I didn't know it that day in Mrs. McKinnis's class, but I was doing important self-accommodation when I chewed on the back of my pen. And chewed on the back of my pen. And then all of a sudden, the entire ink cartridge ejected itself straight into my mouth. And my salivary glands responded to this acrid, chemical, disgusting taste by going into full overdrive and trying to water it down with spit. So I sat there with a mouthful of spit and ink, and what was I supposed to do? Because I wasn't going to swallow that ink because I didn't know how toxic it was. And in my 12-year-old mind, I didn't want to go to the hospital or barf or die because I was chewing on my pen in math class. Neither did I have a water bottle to spit it into because this was the 80s and no kids carried water bottles back in the 80s. I'm pretty sure I didn't even think about going to the front of the classroom where the trash can was to spit it out into there. And I know I kind of thought about asking for the hall pass, but even if I could manage to open my mouth without the spit getting out, I'd have to go, the hall pass, and then everyone in the class would be like, why is she talking so weird? They'd know something was up, that something weird was going on. And if I don't remember much from pre-algebra, I definitely know the elementary into middle school lesson of you don't want the other kids to know when something weird is going on. Because I would describe the culture of my elementary into middle school class as bully or be bullied. And when you're a kid with ADHD, you're often seen as the weird kid. And I won't say I was never, ever on the bullying end, but I was often on the bullied end, like the time in 7th grade, one day, when Colin Hirano asked me to come over and talk to him. And Colin Hirano wasn't a popular kid. He was maybe the less smart in his group of really smart boys who tended to be in my classes and I joked around with a lot, but still it was like a boy wanted to talk to me. And so I went to where he was sitting with all of his friends who I knew really well and said, yes, Colin? And he said, you are so ugly. And I almost couldn't breathe. I was so upset. I remember turning away really fast because I didn't want them to see the tears that were forming in my eyes. And I heard them laughing, going, ha ha, you burned her. Now, fortunately for me, I did recover because 2 weeks later, he made the mistake of trying to do the same thing again. And I was prepared that time. So when he told me I was ugly in front of his friends, I just said, I'd rather be ugly than a shithead like you. And his friends all said, oh, she burned you. And at that moment, I kind of knew why he would have done that to me, because I understood the feeling of winning, of being better than someone else, about looking good because you made them look bad. And that was kind of the dynamic of my middle school and probably middle schools everywhere. So I didn't want anyone to know that I had a mouthful of spit and ink. So I looked at the clock, and I don't know if it was 10 or 15 minutes left in class, but I decided I could do it. I could hold that spit in my mouth until the bell rang. And so I sat there just watching the clock go, tick, tick, tick. And I prayed that Mrs. McInnes wouldn't call on me. And I was thankful that I don't think it was allergy seasons. I hoped I wouldn't have to blow my nose. And I watched the clock. Tick, tick, tick. And my mouth was filling up with more and more and more spit, and my cheeks were starting to bulge out like a chipmunk, and the clock just went tick, tick. And finally, it was 2 minutes and 1 minute. And the bell rang, and I was free, and I packed up my books. But I didn't run out the door because I wanted everything to look normal. So I walked over to Suzanne's desk. Now, Suzanne hadn't gone to elementary school with me. She was kind of a newer friend. We'd only met that year in math class. I knew she understood something about not wanting to be bullied because she had developed certain appendages earlier than some of the rest of us. And I'd heard people taunt when she wore clothing that didn't hide the fact. And we had developed a habit of starting to walk out of class together. So I go over to her desk, and she's slowly packing up her books, and she says, "Hey, how's it going?" And I go, She's like, "What? What's going on?" But she walked with me out into the hallway, and I looked in one direction towards the bathroom and the drinking fountain, and there were a bunch of kids over there. And I looked to the other side, and there were the doors to outside, only 10 short feet away. So we went for that. And as soon as I got out those doors, there was a patch of grass right next to the cement sidewalk, and I let out a stream of blue spit into the grass. And I looked over at Suzanne, and her face was kind of scrunched up, and she was half disgusted, half confused, and she said, "Have you started chewing?" And I knew she didn't mean pens, she meant tobacco. And in my engineer PhD world, chewing tobacco was something that people outside of our set did, not people in our set, like it seemed like something done by professional baseball players or stoners who skipped class to hang out in the smoking area, not like the honor student group that I was in. So I said, "Oh, only pens." And I took the risk of explaining what had happened. And I watched her face because I knew this was a make or break moment. Would she act disgusted and dump me because I'd done this weird thing? Would she tell everyone? What would happen? And her face started moving into a grimace that was laughter. But not the laughter of those boys who were behind Colin Hirano. This was a laughter because, quite frankly, she saw that this situation was utterly ridiculous. And I started laughing too, and we laughed so hard our stomachs hurt, and we had to run so that she didn't miss her bus. Now, I'm not going to say that this moment was the end of bully or be bullied, but it was moments like this one that taught me a very different way of dealing with my own and other people's mishaps that had nothing to do with bullying. We could laugh at the ridiculousness of life. And to this day, that is my favorite thing to chew on.